Every haunted place has a story with a dark past. This is Ghost Encounters Podcast. Due to the graphic and violent things discussed on this episode, listener discretion is advised. Welcome back, all you spooky people, to the 16th episode of the first season of Ghost Encounters Podcast. I am paranormal investigator Justin Torok.
And I'm Jordan, the captain for the day.
Since this episode came out just after the 110th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, we will be diving into haunted vessels and tragedies. And wouldn't you say the most iconic is definitely Titanic?
Yes, absolutely.
So let's start there. The White Star Line's Titanic was built at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, starting in 1909 with construction taking 3 years. Titanic actually started taking lives from the start, killing 8 men during the construction of the ship. After construction, it weighed 46,000 tons and measured 882 feet 8 inches, the distance of more than 4 city blocks. This was, in that time, considered the grandest and largest ship in the world.
Yeah, they were competing with another shipping line, which I can't remember the name of it right now, but they beat them in speed, but they wanted to make up for it by having the biggest ship ever to sail the sea.
Yeah. Not only that, but the Titanic had what they considered the most luxurious accommodations they've ever seen. First class was completely over the top. Second class on the Titanic was similar to first class of other ships, and third class, people actually considered it comfortable.
So I actually found out that the cost in 1912 was around $7.5 million.
It's a lot
which,
for back then.
Yeah, is extremely a lot considering it's around $400 million in today's dollars.
Holy shit.
Yeah, that it was a big deal. I found out also that there were no safety instructions or procedures when they got on the ship. So basically, people that were hired to work on the Titanic showed up when the passengers showed up. And they just walked in and said, "Hey, where do you want me?" So there was really no great organization.
This was the biggest ship ever built. Workers didn't even know where to go? How to even direct people?
Yeah. So there were 2 engines that they put in after they put the Titanic into water. They actually continued building and all that stuff. So there were 2 engines. Both of them were 30 feet tall. They were capable of 30,000 horsepower, which is the same as 10 diesel locomotives at the time. This was a super big deal. It was like changing the game, basically. And everybody wanted to be like the Titanic after they saw this ship.
So Titanic actually had a nickname very early on. Before it even set sail, people called it the unsinkable Titanic.
Yeah, and they cursed themselves by saying God can only sink the ship or something like that.
Yeah, that was the line.
Yeah.
God could only sink this ship.
Well,
which is crazy. It had 16 bulkhead doors, correct?
Yeah.
The design was that 4 of these compartments could actually fill up with water, and the Titanic could contain its buoyancy.
So there actually was a sister ship. There was another sister ship. There was 3 of them, but I can't remember. They changed the name of the third one, and I can never remember which one it is. But for right now, the Olympic was made around 1911, and one interesting little tidbit about it, it was designed previously than the Titanic, so they used the Olympic to make the Titanic.
Gotcha. They used design features of the Olympic to make the Titanic.
Yeah, because it had those bulkhead doors, and they had a ship collision with a warship.
Oh, jeez.
And there was a huge chunk taken out of the back end of the ship. And because of how it was designed with the bulkheads, the water never exceeded the bulkhead line where it would go into the next compartment. Gotcha. Is that what I want to say? Compartment? And it actually continued to sail. And it didn't sink because of that design, which is why they used it when they made the Titanic.
Right. And that one had only a handful of compartments while the Titanic had 16.
Yeah.
So of course they thought, there's no way anyone can sink this ship.
Yeah, and you can look up photos online to show you exactly how big this hole that I'm talking about was. And one interesting fact is that the same captain was involved in that collision and then went to sail on in the Titanic.
So you're saying Captain Edward Smith, who was the captain of the Titanic, was also the captain of the Olympic?
Yeah. And they treated him like royalty. Like how celebrities are treated nowadays is probably how he was treated back in his day. Like, he was the biggest fucking thing. He was the biggest deal.
And this was actually supposed to be his very last role as captain.
Oh, was it really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
He was retiring after this trip.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
Well, he cheated death once, and then he got on the Titanic and he tried to do it again, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. So there's actually an interesting story about a nurse named Violet Jessup, and she was actually on all 3 sister ships: the Titanic, the Britannic, and the Olympic.
The Britannic. See, I forgot that name.
And she survived all 3 disasters.
Whoa, that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is that good luck or bad luck?
I don't know.
That you're on 3 ships that have
like
some kind of disaster.
It's bad luck for everybody around you, but you survive, so I guess it's good luck for you. That's interesting. I did not know about that. Like a person being on all 3.
If I knew her, I would not want to get on a ship with her.
Neither would I.
Then on April 10th, 1912, the Titanic started its first and last voyage, starting in Southampton, England, hoping to make it to New York City. Jordan, did you find any flaws in the design or any little problems that happened after the Titanic actually set sail?
Yeah, so I know that we had a discussion about these compartments before we decided on this podcast. So I, being who I am, decided that I want to look into it a little bit more about the make and model of the Titanic and what else could be an issue other than just these compartments. So I actually found out while watching a documentary called 10 Mistakes That Sank the Titanic. There was actually a fire that was burning in the coal room when Titanic took sail.
That's not good.
It was on fire when they started taking passengers in. So the fire burned for 10 days in the coal room, which eventually led to a warped bulkhead, and this was located in Boiler Room 5. And due to the damage, some water was actually leaking in at about 1 to 2 buckets per hour. That was even before the collision with the iceberg.
Right.
Like, it was already taking in water. So that means it was not watertight like the design was supposed to be.
Right.
And leading off that, the speed of the Titanic didn't really have anything to do with the captain wanting to rush to New York, like people would say. There's a new theory.
Right, like what happened in the movies.
Yeah.
That wasn't the...
Yeah, there's a new theory that says that the coal, they were using the coal to try to put out the fire, and then they had to keep using the coal that was lighting back up on fire, so they were putting it back into the engine, and they were just hauling ass, burning coal everywhere.
Gotcha. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So yeah, that led to a big problem, and they found that out with research that there was actually like a line in the hull before like it even hit the iceberg.
Gotcha.
And that leads to a bunch of more problems that I'll get to.
So going back to the bulkhead doors, just like in the movie when Mr. Andrews is talking about the design of the ship, the bulkhead doors don't reach all the way to the top of the floor.
Yeah, they're shorter.
The design is to allow the water to kind of flow from one compartment to the other, but because of this, it just kept filling up and it had nowhere to go. And
if it reaches the top of the bulkhead, the whole process is pretty much useless because it's designed so that it doesn't spill over. So if it's spilling over and spilling over and spilling over, that's why he basically started shitting his pants. Like, we have 2 hours until this thing fucking sinks.
Yeah.
Leading into the make and model of the Titanic, there were 3 million wrought iron rivets, and they actually had 3 times the amount of slag, which is an impurity when making iron ore, which was 3 times the amount of residue that was allowed to build. So they weren't even supposed to use them.
Right. So some of the rivets were up to standard.
Yes.
And some of them weren't, and they were kind of weaker than the other rivets that were
absolutely. Used. Yeah. It's terrible. First off, it was a terrible idea to use iron ore. It's not as strong as steel. And there's things that happen when you change from like hot to cold with iron. It becomes more brittle. It can slip, slide. You know what I mean?
And then we had the Titanic going from neutral waters to freezing cold waters in the Atlantic.
Yeah. So, so when they were exposed to cold, they became brittle. The reason that they had to use the iron rivets was because it was really hard to bring in the big machinery that they used for the other places in building.
Gotcha.
Because while they were building, this was the tighter place that they had to put these rivets.
Right, so that big-ass machine couldn't fit to get those other rivets in, so they had to use the iron ones.
Yeah, and iron is a simple, it's just a metal element naturally from Earth. And in comparison, steel is man-made.
Right. So
naturally, obviously man-made, it's made to be stronger, made to be used better, takes out impurities, all those other things that suck about iron.
Yeah.
Basically.
Then just a few days after the Titanic started its maiden voyage, on April 14th, around 11:40 p.m., the Titanic hit an iceberg. One of the guys in the crow's nest, his name was Frederick Fleet. He's the one that saw the iceberg, and they didn't have their binoculars. Would they have had enough time to avoid the iceberg if he had? Maybe, maybe not. It's dark out. It's pitch black out in the middle of the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. You have nothing but moonlight, and there's some fog.
Yeah. Who
knows if they would even have seen it? I read a fun fact that the key to the locker that had the binoculars was actually recovered from the wreck, and it sold for a huge amount of money.
I think it was like $150,000.
It was sold for a huge amount of money in auction. It's crazy. He's the one that actually said the words, iceberg right ahead.
Oh, wow.
By the time he said that, they had 37 seconds to react.
Oh, my gosh.
That's it.
Well, I know that there's theories about if they didn't turn and they actually hit it head on, it would have it would have saved them.
It probably would have, because it wouldn't have scraped along the entire side and bottom of the ship. And it probably would have actually ended up only filling up the first 4 compartments if they would have hit it straight on.
I think if they would have followed their own advice and did, because they had a double bottom, if they would have had a double hull, that could have probably saved them too. A little bit of time. At least a little. They just needed a little bit more time to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So after the crash, people were wondering what was going on. Like, it was obviously it wasn't that noticeable that they hit the iceberg. Like, there were quotes that I got where people said that if they had water in a glass, the glass wouldn't have even spilled from the jar from hitting the iceberg. So people were just nosy, and they ended up looking out of portholes that are in the side of the ship to see what happened. And this turned out to be a big issue for the sinking.
Well, let me guess. People are opening all these porthole windows.
Oh, yeah.
And now, as the Titanic's going down, the water's just rushing into the windows.
You're absolutely correct. You are absolutely correct. So they were basically left open by the passengers when the crew members came up and said, like, hey, we want you to go to the deck, get your life vests on, whatever. And they estimate that leaving 12 open portholes would have actually doubled the iceberg damage to the Titanic. So basically take it hitting the iceberg again, that amount of water was coming in if you left 12 of these portholes open.
Jeez, that's crazy.
Yeah. Because it was dipping, obviously we know because of the compartments filling, because they left these portholes open, the water was just flying on in.
Flying in, yeah.
Yep. They're lucky they got the 2 hours that Mr. Andrews said they got, but if they would have closed these freaking windows, they could have had a little bit more.
Yeah, it actually took about 2 hours and 40 minutes for it to sink, around 2:20 a.m.
I just think that was fucking stupid. Like, I think you should have used your brain. Like, granted, they didn't know that it was actually going to sink.
Well, right, but, like, it's freezing cold out.
Yeah.
The water surrounding the Titanic was 28 degrees.
Yeah.
Who leaves windows open? Besides you in the cold.
Yeah, well, that's true. I was just about to say, why pop those windows open? But I'm not on a ship sinking,
No, exactly. So with passengers and crew, there were just over 2,200 people on board. Over 1,500 people died in the 2 hours and 40 minutes that it took the Titanic to sink. Most of them plunging into the freezing 28-degree water. I did see an interesting fact that the Titanic's lights only went out when she finally went underwater due to the tireless efforts of the ship's engineers who stayed behind to keep the electricity and pumps running while the ship sank.
Oh, wow.
They're heroes for that because that allowed the radios to keep running and for the distress signals to keep going out via Morse code. The sad thing is not one of the 25 engineers survived.
Aww. Yeah. That's so sad that they basically risked their lives to try to save everybody.
Yeah.
Because there were ships out there. Like, I know that I was doing some research, and I know that there were 3, and the one was only 10 minutes away. Like, that's a long time for a little ship, but, I mean, it's still, that's close enough to be able to try to come and save some people.
Right.
But when I was listening to this one podcast, it talked about how they didn't come to help because they were worried themselves that they would hit ice because there was just so much frozen icebergs and frozen, like, people stopped. Like, some ships stopped and waited because there was just so much freaking ice out there.
Yeah. the captain did get warnings about the amount of icebergs that were out there.
Yeah.
But they kind of just ignored it. Like you said, other ships stopped and waited or went slower.
He was dining with first class when he missed one of them. Tell him, hey, there's freaking ice everywhere. You need to relax.
So once the ship went down, it was actually rumored that the ship cracked in half. There were so many eyewitness reports, but there was only so many that survived by the time the ship cracked in half and fully went down.
Yeah.
Because they started putting people on lifeboats and sending them out there. Unfortunately, most of the lifeboats weren't filled to the capacity that they could be. Otherwise, a lot more people would have been saved. So here we have mostly first-class people in lifeboats rowing out in the middle of the Atlantic in the dark in freezing cold water. Who knows where you're going?
Yeah.
You know? But the only ones that survived that saw the ship actually crack in half was only a handful. It was confirmed years later that the ship cracked in half when they actually found the wreckage underwater.
Yeah. They say that Molly Brown, the unsinkable Molly Brown, she actually watched it go straight up in the air, like basically before it cracked. Like she like described how it cracked. Granted, they found out that it wasn't actually straight up in the air, but you know, when you're shitting your pants watching what you were just floating around on the ocean, and you're just watching it fall apart right in front of you.
Well, I could imagine that was straight up in the air because, like you said, those bulkhead doors, you could just spill one over the other. So as it's going down, all that weight is being pushed to the front of the ship.
Yep. And those rivets buckled, actually, when they hit the iceberg, which basically caused a bigger hole because they didn't design it well.
Right, so all those seams were allowing all this water to rush in.
And because they used those iron rivets, it just buckled under
Yeah.
pressure, basically. Cracked off of the ice, just broke.
So now we have all these lifeboats in the water. The ship that actually took in all those survivors in lifeboats was the Carpathia.
And they said that they didn't even have the proper amount of lifeboats per passenger, like for all of the passengers.
On the Titanic,
because they didn't know the protocol for it, because it was the biggest ship of its time. You know, they didn't know, they just went to their standard amount of lifeboats.
Right.
So not necessarily they needed to double that for the Titanic, but they needed more lifeboats anyway.
Yeah.
So they didn't have their shit together.
Not like that even would have helped because they weren't filling
yeah, I mean, there wasn't there like one that had like 5 people in it?
Yeah.
Like, come on.
It's probably the, you know, uptight first class people not wanting to share space.
Yep. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
And one of the richest men in the world at the time died on the Titanic, John Jacob Astor.
Mm-hmm.
He was in his 40s, and his pregnant wife at the time was only 18 years old.
I'm making a face right now. You people can't tell, but I'm making
gross.
a face.
She did survive. He tried to get on a lifeboat with her, but they said no.
Doesn't that suck?
As we all know, it was women and children first, so I guess money can't buy you everything.
Nope. Money didn't matter at the end.
No.
We all know that the moon causes tides. You know that, like, high tides and low tides are caused by the moon. So the moon's gravitational pull generates a phenomenon called tidal force. So the tidal force causes Earth and its water to have a bulging effect on the side closest to the moon and the side furthest from the moon. So those bulges are high tides.
Gotcha.
So they're actually just recently, I believe, starting to think that this could have affected the iceberg locations and how this all, like, why there was more icebergs, like, in the ocean at the time and all that stuff. So on the same year, on January 4th, for the first time in 1,400 years, the moon was the closest to the Earth.
Oh, wow.
That's why I wanted to bring up tidal force and everything like that. So actually, they think that it led to higher tides. So due to higher tides, they think that icebergs cracked off and there was a way more amount, like a higher and above average amount of icebergs floating around the Atlantic Ocean at the time that Titanic was actually setting sail. So I thought that was really cool, so I wanted to look that up.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the Titanic that experienced iceberg problems. All these other ships were either stationary or going really slow because there's so many out there.
And they're used to, these people traveled the Atlantic. Like, they were used to icebergs.
This path for ships to take is not uncommon.
Yeah.
Other ships took the same path.
And obviously that theory is up for debate, again, like, for some people. I think it's a very plausible thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's always something to debate about.
This was one of the worst tragedies of its time.
Absolutely horrible. I couldn't imagine freezing. I can't even stand in the summer when the pool's 70 degrees. Like, imagine when you're actually, like, cold getting into freezing temperatures. And then after so and so many minutes, your body completely shuts down. You're going to lose consciousness after so and so many minutes. Imagine being in the water for hours. The only guy that had his shit together was the drunk guy.
The cook, yeah. They say he was able to withstand the cold waters because he was drinking so much whiskey.
And he was swimming. He didn't stop swimming. He kept looking for people that were alive. He kept looking for boats. He flipped over a boat. He found a boat that must have toppled over or something, and he hung out on that boat until he was rescued.
Yeah, there were about 6, I believe, survivors pulled from the water. That's it. Out of the 1,500 people that went down that day, about 6
That's
were
insane.
pulled from the water.
That's insane.
Can you imagine being on that ship? I mean, there's screams and chaos. No one knows what's going on, and when the ship's going down, people are leaving in lifeboats. The lights are probably flickering because water's rushing. Like, so much chaos.
Those survivors must have had some sort of trauma from this, some sort of post-traumatic stress. Like, I know that I was actually listening to a different podcast today, and these guys were talking about a kid, like a younger kid. I can't remember his age, but I knew he was young. He survived the Titanic, and he actually could never go to a baseball game. He loved baseball, but he can never go and sit at the game because the cheering reminded him of the sinking of the Titanic.
Yeah. I was reading an article that the city where the Titanic left from was deeply impacted because there was actually a school where half the kids lost their fathers.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
And going back to that, Frederick Fleet, the one who pointed out the iceberg, he actually survived, but later on in life, his wife left him and he committed suicide.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
So much tragedy and awfulness is attached to every inch of this ship.
Mm-hmm.
As we know, it lies in 2 pieces at the bottom of the Atlantic, but some of these pieces are actually being brought up. Artifacts have been pulled up and cleaned and restored. Pieces of the ship have been pulled up, and there are now Titanic museums that house these things. Like, there's the one in Missouri. There's a real life, like, portion replica of the Titanic. Inside the museum, you'll find over 400 artifacts from the ship itself. Some of them being passed down from survivors in the families. These items range from pieces of jewelry that have been handed down from survivors and even pieces of the ship. And they are said to still hold the spirits of those perished in the tragedy. Recently, employees and tour guides of the Titanic Museum have claimed to see mysterious apparitions and phenomena. The 2 main sightings being that of John Jacob Astor on the exact replica staircase that they built, and that of a small child by the piano in the music room. Guests have even heard frantic screaming while on this tour.
Oh, wow. That's creepy.
One of the ladies who's in charge of making sure everything's cleaned at the end of the day and wiping down all the windows, one night she was wiping everything down and she was almost done and went back to that piano room and she found 2 child-sized handprints on the glass.
Sorry if anybody has kids, but kid ghosts scare me. Like, I don't know, there's something about kid ghosts that they're just extra creepy, like shining stuff. Like, that's just, I don't know, I don't mess with kid ghosts.
One of the most interesting artifacts on display there, I think, is there's a life jacket on display that was cut from one of the floating bodies in the water.
And like, how do you expect the place not to be haunted? Like, you pulled it from a dead body.
Exactly.
For Christ's sake.
Exactly. So, as you and I know, because we watched this episode recently, Ghost Adventures went there. And their episode is Season 19, Episode 12. 1912, the year of the sinking of the Titanic.
Oh, shit, that's why you said that the other day. I was like, why does that matter? Like, I had no idea at the time.
They definitely did that on purpose. They caught, in the same room where those handprints are, they actually caught a small figure on the SLS camera by the glass. And when they went to that spot, there was more small handprints on the glass.
That's insane.
Then they did an Ovulus session. Right then and there, they asked, what is your age? And it replied 6. They asked male or female, and it responded female. So apparently a female 6-year-old is the one putting handprints on the glass and is.
But that just validates what people see. Like, people have seen a little girl, and now you just have this fancy little doohickey, I don't know what the hell you call them, telling you that it's this little girl. Yeah. Like, that's insane. Like, how do you, like, skeptics, how do you explain it? Like, you can't just look at that and say, oh,
yeah, it's different people.
It happens, you know?
People come to this museum from all over the world. It's all different kinds of people saying the same thing.
That's just insane. That's crazy to me.
And then Zach was in a room in the dark, and he claimed to have seen the apparition of a little boy with, like, dirty blonde hair. The apparition kind of, like, vanished into another room, and at that time, the other investigator that was in that room saw the same exact apparition.
What the hell?
And when they followed it, it ended up at the Child Memorial. In the museum.
I don't think I was paying attention at this point because I don't remember this part.
I thought that's
creepy.
Yeah, it was creepy.
But that's cool though. At the same time,
but also a little sad.
Oh, absolutely. Who wants to be a? Who,
Who
wants to be stuck at a place like that?
This child spirit just led them right to where the wall is that shows pictures of all the children that died.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So there's actually another ship that sailed the same ports as the Titanic, and some say it was doomed because of that. This ship was the Queen Mary.
Yep, which was built to be bigger and better than the Titanic.
So, of course, we have these companies trying to do bigger and better.
Yep.
Again.
Always bigger and better. And it also had the same compartment design as the Titanic. They tried to still follow, just in case it hit, because it worked once, so they tried to do it again. I mean, it failed with the Titanic, but, I mean, it is a good design. Like, it works, you know, it's just, it can't sustain that much damage, so no, I see why they followed.
It can't sustain that much damage on the side of the ship, but one penetrating force, it could survive.
Yeah.
Right? The Queen Mary set sail not too long after the Titanic. On May 27th, 1936, the Queen Mary also departed from Southampton, England, embarking on her maiden voyage. The Queen Mary is actually considered to be the most haunted ship in the world. Ooh. This ship carried some 2.2 million passengers in its peacetime and about 810,000 military personnel in the Second World War.
Holy shit.
Well, let me talk about that. As World War II started, the Queen Mary's transformation into a troop ship had begun. She was painted a camouflage gray color and striped of her luxurious amenities, and she was dubbed the Gray Ghost because of her stealth and stark color.
Ooh.
So during World War II, the Queen Mary was used as a troop ship because of how big it was and how many troops it could transport from one location to another. Who knows how many hundreds of, or even thousands of troops may have perished on the ship during these trips.
Yeah.
Some were wounded, some had to be, there was a hospital there, some people had to be taken care of, some were sick. Who knows how many, and there was actually even prisoners of war on this boat.
Oh wow, that's insane. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So there's no way of knowing how many hundreds of troops perished on this ship. And then during this time, wasn't there a crash with another ship?
Yeah, there was actually a crash that involved the HMS Kurosawa. I hope I pronounced that right. I made sure I tried to look it up like 50 times before I tried to say it because I'm terrible with pronunciation. But in 1942, 337 men froze to death when the Queen Mary didn't stop after striking it. So the reason that they collided was because of U-boats. They were worried about U-boats.
Okay.
So the
Kurosawa was kind of like a escort for the Queen Mary.
Yeah.
Right? And they were told to move in like a zigzag pattern.
Yes, I was getting to that. They were trying to like kind of move back and forth. They knew that the Queen Mary was around, but because of conditions and everything, they didn't see it. And then, as the story goes, it was too late, and they actually wound up colliding. And after the ship basically sank...
so the Kurosawa sank?
Yeah. And after a couple hours, 101 people were rescued, but most of the people, like we said, a little bit over 300 people died. And that was the Atlantic Ocean as well, right? Yeah. Because it was right by Ireland.
Yeah.
Just like before, you know? So it's so tragic. It's just terrible. Like, don't you people learn?
No one learns. All these ships are tied to so many tragedies. Jumping forward a little bit, on July 10th, 1966, an 18-year-old crew member named Jay Petter was crushed to death by water weight door number 13. Why did it have to be number 13?
Yeah.
Some people say that this is actually the most haunted location on the ship. That door is not there anymore. You just walk right through it. But people have claimed to see him. They've claimed to be touched, heard whispers, all kinds of things in this area of the ship.
Yeah. I actually was listening to something, and they actually referred to him as Half-Hatch Harry.
Oh, no.
I don't mean to laugh.
I know it.
But
it's
I
awful.
just am like, you people and your little puns, like, come on, there's a time and a place. And that was not it.
Because when those waterway doors go down, there's no force that's going to stop them.
And
especially a human body. So
there was rumors that was murder, and it wasn't an accident.
Oh.
There was an accidental rumor, and that there was somebody pushed this guy and killed him.
Interesting.
So
yeah, if you watch anything about the Queen Mary, a lot of people say that's. I mean, I think there's about 55 recorded deaths, and that a lot of them are mysterious.
Yeah, I have that there's 150 spirits that have said to be seen at the Queen Mary. Wow. Still to this day. So
the Queen Mary is docked in Long Beach, California. It is now actually used as a hotel, which is pretty interesting. Yeah. People just stay on this ship, which is, I think, pretty awesome. But hundreds and thousands of people that have stayed there have seen spirits wandering around.
There's a specific tragic story that stuck with me was a husband that came home from the war, and he took his wife and kids, I think he had 2 daughters, to the Queen Mary, and trying to better himself because he kind of like lived his life with a little cloud over his head after the war.
Right.
You know, they didn't really get post-traumatic stress back in the day. They didn't understand that theory. And I guess there's a little theory that he was almost talked into doing evil things by a spirit that was there, like a malicious spirit. And they also blamed it on post-traumatic stress, and he killed his whole family in one of the rooms.
Holy shit.
I can't remember the room number, but I know that after this accident, there was another accident in that same room, and they closed that room off. They left it so that nobody could stay there. And then on Friday the 13th of so-and-so year, they opened it up. They replaced everything in the room. They put Ouija boards in there. They put it at
great thing to put in there.
Yeah, it's like a little attraction for people to try to see if they could stay the whole night. You know, anything to make money.
Right.
And they do a bunch of other things, like, you know, $50 a person for these like ghost tours and these like pop-up events that happen there and stuff. So they do a lot of ghostly attraction.
Yeah, during October there is a haunted house throughout the ship as well. My stepsister Brittany actually went through it, and she said,
really?
Yeah, she said it was horrifying.
Oh my god, if she says it's horrifying, I'm not going.
She said when she was going through the haunted house on the Queen Mary, there was this one section where it's just a long corridor and the lights are flickering, and there was just a little girl with her back turned in the hallway. And like you try to go up and she like doesn't let you move past her.
So, you know what I said about kids earlier? Yeah, that's completely true still to this day, because that is scary. I'm sorry, if I'm going into a room, a corridor, a hallway, whatever the hell you want to call it, and I see lights flickering and there's a kid down there, I ain't going. I'm going the hell back.
That's actually a little terrifying.
It's terrifying. That's like seeing the little Chucky doll in your hallway for Halloween every time you go up to take a piss.
Yeah, I could do that.
I get scared every single time, and I know it's there, but it's still scary. It's a little itty-bitty being. Pass.
And going back a little bit, some of the first and iconic paranormal evidence actually came from Peter James' investigations on the Queen Mary. Peter James was a world-renowned paranormal investigator and medium. In 1991, Peter James first found the spirit of Jackie, a young girl of about 5 or 6 years of age. He asked who she was, and she audibly replied, "Meet me in the other pool." Peter did as she asked and met Jackie in the first-class pool. And what transpired there has now become part of a paranormal legend. Peter conversed with Jackie for over 10 minutes, and the whole conversation was caught on camera.
Like when we watched this episode together, I was like flabbergasted because, I mean, the Queen Mary's dark. Like, you know, they didn't just send their daughter down the hallway to make some freaking noise. Like, you could tell that the team was just huddled in this one space around him. Like, they weren't, it didn't seem
actually
staged at all.
Captured of Jackie on the stairs of the pool room.
Get the freak out. Yeah. Oh, hell, I got the willies.
There she is peeking over. This picture is going to be on my Instagram and Facebook, along with some other pictures of these places if you want to take a look at it.
Oh, no. Nay. I'd be running. That would get me to run.
Yeah, so Queen Mary is considered the most haunted ship in the world. And it makes sense that she is.
Yeah, I mean, how can you deny that? Especially with over 150 spirits there. Like, come on.
Yeah.
And people can tell that they're different spirits. That's insane. Like,
Yeah.
that's a lot of spirits.
Surprisingly, there's a lot of female spirits versus male spirits. I believe in one of maybe the engine room or another room, one of the male spirits is a little bit vicious.
Oh.
He kind of tries to attack women that go down there.
Well,
Yeah.
screw him. Fine.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to sink into some more haunted vessels. Ghost Encounters podcast is sponsored by the Eric Ledbetter team with Iron Valley Real Estate. Contact the Eric Ledbetter team for all your real estate needs. Visit theericledbetterteam.com. Also sponsored by Phoenix Fire Media. Bring the heat to your online presence with their digital marketing experts, professional photography, and video productions. Visit phoenixfiremedia.com. If you're enjoying Ghost Encounters podcast, hit subscribe. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Ghost Encounters PA. To watch full episodes of the Ghost Encounters show, visit ghost-encounters.com. And we are back. Jordan, what other haunted vessels did you find?
So I actually found a place called Truk Lagoon. It's found in Micronesia, which is an area found in the Central Pacific, right off the coast of Asia. It has the largest collection of shipwrecks on the planet.
Oh.
So basically it's a big-ass graveyard of ships.
Wow.
Yeah. In World War II, Truk Lagoon was the main base for the Imperial Japanese Navy. And in 1944, there was a huge attack that they also compared to Pearl Harbor. So if you imagine how devastating that was,
right.
This was compared to it. So it was called Operation Hailstorm. The U.S. sunk a great number of Japanese warships. That was battleships, aircraft, transport carriers.
Right.
They basically wiped this place out. Operation Hailstorm was also a major naval and air attack, and it lasted 3 days.
3 days?
So, yeah.
Wow.
And they didn't even see it coming. So they didn't even know that the U.S. was just rolling in to destroy them.
Right.
Interesting information that I found on it was there was actually a sub there, like a submarine, that participated in Pearl Harbor.
Oh.
And it actually sank there.
Oh, wow.
Karma. And it sank for a pretty stupid reason. I mean, it's terrible of me to say that it was stupid because people died, but so after Operation Hailstorm, these people were always, the Japanese people were always on high alert. They were worried that another attack was going to happen. And because of the rumor of another air raid happened, they were basically worrying and really panicky about everything. Like if anything made a noise, they were going into panic mode. Yeah. So basically, the submarine that I'm talking about rushed to submerge underwater because they heard something, alarms went off, whatever it was. The commander actually wasn't even there. He was doing business on land.
Oh.
So wasn't even there with his crew. But because the crew was rushing to go and submerge and get to safety, they did not completely secure the command room.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Yeah, so they forgot to completely seal the control room, and it caused the cabin to flood. So naturally water's coming in, so they have to shut themselves somewhere.
Yeah.
So they basically shut themselves into another room, standing shoulder to shoulder. There was 84 men on board, and every single one of them died. 75 crew members and 9 officers perished. The only person to live was the commander that wasn't there.
Right, because it wasn't there.
Yeah, so, and the most devastating thing of the whole accident was that it was a false alarm. And
yeah, it wasn't actually an attack.
Yeah, there was nothing happening. Divers went to try to rescue them. They could hear the banging from within.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, as they wanted to try to save people, but before they could execute a plan, the banging stopped, and all of them died due to lack of oxygen.
That's awful.
Yeah. So the sub is actually still on the floor of Truk Lagoon. You can go visit. There were later attempts to try to get the remains out, but it actually caused more casualties in the process. Divers were drowning, trying to save the crew.
Causing more deaths.
Yep, and they just decided to join the crew because they were dying down there with them, which is really tragic. It was estimated that around 4,000 people died there.
Wow.
That's a lot of freaking people.
Yeah.
And I found out that there were a bunch of ghostly happenings underwater.
Underwater.
Which freaks me out because I was a competitive swimmer, and just being in a foreign place where you can't really hear and you're underwater, everything's muffled, you don't really know what's going on. And it's reported that divers could hear voices around them as they searched through the wreckage, and also ghostly truck engines on the transport ships making like idle noises. So they could hear, and there also were reports that they could see flickering of the lights on the...
Imagine that. Imagine diving down to a wreckage of all these ships and everything else, and all of a sudden you see the flickering headlights of like a car that was sunk.
I'm not gonna lie, you can edit this out, but I would shit my pants. Like, I would not know what to do. I would probably go down to the bottom because I wouldn't be able to move. Like, my body would freeze.
Terrifying.
Yeah, I would be terrified.
And I can't imagine hearing voices underwater because, you can't really, like, hear stuff underwater. Imagine hearing clear voices underwater.
Yeah, this place is really... And it's really eerie. So, like, if you can look up pictures and... it's apparently a beautiful tourist attraction. Like, it is somewhere that people prefer to go to dive, like, especially if you're into diving.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's rusted wreckage everywhere, and it will remain there until it completely breaks down. So I definitely recommend you to go visit.
I'm good. I'm not a diver.
Yeah, you can hear the whispers yourself when you explore the historic graveyard. But also, fun fact, before we go to the next one. There's a lot of Caribbean reef sharks. Sorry, I had to include the sharks in this. They basically cruise around the area, which is another popular thing for divers. People that are interested in sharks like to go there. But reef sharks aren't really that aggressive. It's not common that they're a part of, attacks. But blood can change that. So if you're hanging out with all this rusted, gross stuff, coral, whatever's growing on
the rusted piece of ship.
Yeah, you never know what could happen to you. But one thing that really made me mad is that they do shark feedings right there in Truk Lagoon.
That stuff's not good.
Where people dive. So you're going to go diving and people are going to be feeding the sharks. So they're just going to be looking for food after they get a little bit. They could go into a frenzy, you name it. Because reef sharks, they travel together. They're like a pod. So I just had to add that in. Be careful of the sharks if you go visit, because you never know what could happen to you.
That's a really interesting story. I still cannot imagine diving underwater and seeing the flickering of headlights.
Yeah, when I was reading about it, I was like, this is a good one. This is kind of out of the norm. You wouldn't think going under the water that you would hear whispers or see trucks turn on.
It doesn't matter whether something's underwater or not. It's still haunted.
Yeah. Creepy. And the pictures make it even more creepy.
Yeah. What else did you find?
So I also found an interesting story about the Christmas tree ship.
The Christmas tree ship?
Yeah. It was named the Rouse Simmons. The ship was built in 1868 and it sank to the bottom of Lake Michigan in a winter storm in, ironically, 1912.
Oh, the same year of the sinking of the Titanic.
Yep, a couple months before that.
Wow.
So the cool story about this one is that every year the ship traveled from Wisconsin to Chicago bringing evergreens for people, for Christmas trees for people. It was basically for families that needed, Christmas trees and couldn't afford it. So, and I love Christmas, so it just tugs my little heartstrings to know that people just took trees and tried to bring them around to other people. So this went on for over a decade, and the schooner, which is the name for the ship, I don't know what the difference between a ship and a schooner is, but it could load a little under 6,000 trees onto it.
Oh wow, that's a lot of trees.
Yeah. When the ship sank, the bodies of the captain and the crew were never found. The captain that passed away left behind a wife and 3 daughters. Oh. Yeah, it's pretty sad. But, I'm sure that every other crew member had families. One interesting thing that I found out that there was a message in a bottle from the ship that washed ashore. They don't really know if it's from this specific ship. They kind of just believe so because of how the bottle was put together.
Okay.
So it was actually corked using a small piece of cut pine instead of like a cork. Yeah. So other than occasional trees that were caught in fishing nets from the wreckage, this was really the only remaining discovery they found from the vessel. And they could read the message, which I thought was super cool. They have that.
What did it say?
It says, Friday, everybody goodbye. I guess we're all through. During the night, the small boat washed overboard. Leaking bad. Invald and Steve lost too. God help us.
Is that time to write a note
As
and cork it with a piece of branch?
Yeah, like somebody was just scribbling.
So they know like what caused it to sink at all?
Just the storm. I guess something. I don't know if they.
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know if. I think there was something that said that because of the wind, the sails cracked.
Oh, I can't believe that none of the bodies washed up. They must have all just been trapped inside, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if they were trapped. That's something that our listeners can read up on because I'm not sure myself. A wallet belonging to the captain washed ashore. The wallet was well preserved, which was awesome because it was wrapped in oilskin.
Oh.
And it had business cards, newspaper clippings, and other things that had to do with what they did. Like all these positive
that's a
little
historic find. Wash up.
Yeah, and the wallet was returned to the family.
Oh, that's nice.
And they could do what they wanted with it.
That's
nice. But some ghostly information is that there are reports that the ship and its crew can still be seen sailing the same route that they used to travel before it sank.
Oh, wow.
So people still report seeing
same ship.
Yeah, like an old school ship. Can you imagine seeing like a scary ass ghost ship? Like, you know what I mean? Like you're out there probably in like a little kayak or some shit doing your thing, and then you just see like an old ass Pirates of the Caribbean looking ship. Like I would lose it. I'd be like blinking my eyes 45 times. I just couldn't imagine it. But to conclude that story, in Chicago they still do a reenactment.
Oh, really?
For the Ralph Simmons by the U.S. Coast Guard with a ship called the Mackinac. I thought that was a really cool name, so I had to add it. So thousands of trees are still delivered by boat every year and given to families who can't afford them. And there are other helpers other than the U.S. Coast Guard, but there was like a huge list of people that help out, and I wasn't sure if I should have a whole list of people that help out.
I don't need to name a whole list.
Yeah.
But the Coast Guard does the reenactment and all
Yeah. There's like a bunch of volunteers.
Yeah. That's a really nice thing.
Yeah, I just thought it was a cute little tradition, and I thought it was nice, we had all these tragic things, and at least they're trying to do some good,
Well, there's one good note, but now it's back to tragedy.
Oh, shoot.
So I have a couple other haunted vessels to talk about. The USS Lexington, nicknamed the Blue Ghost, because the Japanese Navy actually reported sinking it 4 times during World War II. This aircraft carrier can now rightfully call itself a ghost ship thanks to the number of spirits that's said to haunt it. Most famous, though, is Charlie, a fair-haired, polite sailor who often gives tours of the engine room. Staff and visitors to the USS Lexington Museum in Texas have also spotted at least 2 other sailors and a Japanese pilot.
Oh, wow.
So there's this nice guy just giving a nice tour of the engine room.
Here you go. I'm dead, but here you go. This is where I used to be. That's cute.
Then we have the USS Yorktown. 141 men lost their lives while serving on the USS Yorktown from 1943 to 1974. And many believe that some of those men have never left. Sightings have tracked shadowy figures, including one named Shadow Ed, and full-body apparitions in uniform. People have also heard footsteps, mysterious voices, and pans being tossed in the gallery. This one's located in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina.
Don't you ever just hear that stuff and you're like, would I pick up that pan and throw it back? Like, you know what I mean? Like, would I get annoyed? Like, whack whack with this pan?
But imagine being in this huge ass haunted ship and all of a sudden you just hear pans being tossed all over the place. It's crazy.
That would scare me. I think being in the dark, looking and being in a ship First off, my anxiety would be through the roof knowing I'm on water, let alone
You're a
deal with
swimmer.
the ghosts. The whole thing about being inside something that is all, like, I would never be able to go in a submarine. I would have claustrophobia.
I wouldn't do that either.
Paranoia out the ass. Like, I could not do it. So these people, I salute you, because I could never do this stuff. I'd freak out the whole time.
Then we have the USS Hornet. Queen Mary was the most haunted ship in the world. This is considered one of the most haunted ships in the world. Open for tours, this World War II era aircraft carrier operates today as the USS Hornet Museum. Staff and visitors claim to see vanishing bloodstains and full apparitions in sailor uniform. Often, photographs taken in the infirmary reveal shadowy figures lying on the beds and people routinely hearing voices of men talking, as well as footsteps. Imagine, like, seeing bloodstains and then all of a sudden they're gone.
I would think I'm crazy. Like,
right?
That would be like...
Or imagine taking a picture in the infirmary and then you have, like, person-shaped shadowy figures laying in the beds.
Yeah, that's it. This stuff is just insane. Like, all these ships, like, and it's sad because these are military ships. Like,
yeah. And this one's located in Alameda, California. Before we go, I have one last really cool story to share. It's called the Jenny. The Jenny is a ghost ship you might not have heard of, but it's a story worth sharing. The Jenny was found frozen inside of an ice barrier of the Drake Passage in 1840, almost 20 years after it first disappeared in 1823. Drake Passage is the treacherous waters that connect the southern tip of Chile to the northern tip of Antarctica. In 1840, the crew of a ship called the Hope sighted a battered ship before they realized it was actually a ghost ship. Although it was battered, it appeared to be manned. In fact, 7 men were standing at attention on the main deck. However, as the Hope approached, they realized that these men were not standing at attention. They were frozen solid.
oh my lord!
Yep. Captain Brighton of the Hope was the first aboard the Jenny to investigate. Below deck, he came across the captain of the Jenny, eerily frozen solid, sitting in his chair, pen in hand, writing his last entry in the ship's log. The last entry in the logbook was this: May 4th, 1823. No food for 71 days. I am the only one left alive. The crew of the Hope grabbed the logbook and left everyone and everything as it was, frozen. The Jenny still sails the Antarctic waters and has never been seen since.
What the heck?
I thought that was a really cool story.
First off, 71 days with no food. I can't even last 2 minutes. 2 minutes without food. These poor people. That's horrible. That's a horrible way to die.
It's pretty crazy, I guess.
And to freeze to death, too?
Yeah.
Ugh.
I can't believe that 7 men were kind of just standing on the deck. Like nothing.
Like, how did they not fall over? Like, you froze. You
know what this sounds like? It sounds like the day after tomorrow when people just froze instantly.
Yeah, that's
crazy.
The
captain was still writing in his passage, pen in hand. He was
and
still
your
writing.
body shut down and your eyes are still open. That's crazy. That's insane. That doesn't even sound normal, right.
No.
It just sounds so crazy.
But the ship has never been seen since.
Wow.
It's still just it still sails around the frozen icy waters of Antarctica.
That's so cool. That's a cool story.
Yeah.
Well, it's cool.
I mean, tragic for them, but
yeah, sad.
Cool story.
That's not a good choice of words.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. Stay spooky.
And your captain is signing off.